lot of people, and certainly the medical community, are saying, I have the World Health Organization report in front of me, and they're saying, but the World Health Organization says that, for instance, it's recommended that children start from 6 to 8 months once they've been weaned, or they're not being exclusively breastfed, that they should start with a thick porridge, for instance. And
Yes.
you know, the South African Department of Health also recommend that children start with grains and porridges. So it's almost not surprising in a way that we've been told this for the last almost 50 years.
Yeah.
And Professor Noakes is saying something different.
Yeah. Well, I think so. Professor Noakes' ethos is always to look for paradox in science. So science says this is the way something should be, but if it says this is the way something should be, and this is what the policy says, but how it's supposed to be isn't, then there must be something wrong. So he always looks for the paradox. He had the same theory when it came to rugby, and they had said that the way a scrum was formed was absolutely 100% safe, and there was nothing wrong with the rules of rugby. And Noakes came out and said, well, if there's nothing wrong with the rules of rugby, why do people's necks keep breaking? And that was his first sort of thing that he came out with. And everyone ousted him, and they thought he was a complete idiot. Until now we've got some of the strictest rules around rugby and scrum formation, and the least neck injuries. So, he's followed that same ethos the whole way through it. And it came down to diet, when he noticed he had followed all of the rules of diet for 30 years and found himself being obese, tired, and approaching type 2 diabetes. And he thought, well, there must be something wrong with the guidelines. If I follow the guidelines and I'm still unhealthy, and that's where it opens up. So I don't know if you want me to explain the two models.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Please.
So, and this is as a layman, speaking to laymen, but on a total top level, there are two models of obesity, and the model that was used up until the 1940s was a European model, a German model, called the hormonal model of obesity. And that was based on the idea that...
That sounds terrifying.
Hormonal, yeah.
Yes.
Well, so basically it's hormones that monitor control how fat you get. Okay, and then the energy balance model of obesity it basically says it's just calories. If you have more calories, you get fat, and if you have less calories than you need, you get thin, and that's it. And the thing that, both of the models actually ignore is the brain. But the other thing is that what the energy balance model ignores is the type of calories you have, and it ignores the hormonal response to different types of calories. So, for instance, if you got calories from fat or calories from carbohydrates, your body deals with them in very different ways. So, to explain the hormonal model of obesity in very simple terms, and please, I'm not a doctor, but this is how I understand it to work. If you eat carbohydrates, your digestive system converts them into glucose, and then you get glucose in your blood. And what your body does is secretes insulin to drive the glucose to your fat cells, and basically the glucose either gets used for fuel immediately, or it gets stored as fat. And that's the thing. So if you have an abnormal response to glucose in your bloodstream, you over-secrete insulin. And the moment glucose arrives in your bloodstream, you secrete all this insulin, and it chases all of the glucose to the fat cells. So everything that you don't burn as fuel immediately goes into your fat cells. And then instead of burning the fat as a fuel, you eat carbohydrates again, because they say you need your carbohydrates for energy, and you burn a tiny bit of them, and the rest of it sits as glucose in your bloodstream, and your insulin drives the fat drives the glucose into your fat cells. So now if you think about it, they say that you need to exercise to lose weight, but exercising makes you very hungry, and so what happens is you eat more carbohydrates. You only use a little bit of the carbohydrate as fuel, and then the rest of it goes into your fat cells, and then you're hungry again because you've been exercising, so you eat more carbohydrates, and then they get driven to your fat cells. So you just, it's a self-fulfilling cycle. So the theory behind a low carbohydrate diet is that your body will use carbohydrates as fuel as long as you're providing your body with carbohydrates. The moment you deprive your body of carbohydrates, your body has to click into a different fuel source. And it turns out that your body operates on fat much more efficiently. So you can only burn fat when you have no carbohydrates. Otherwise, you will burn carbohydrates continuously.
But Jonno, there are so many South Africans, many in my family among them, who are on high cholesterol meds
Yes.
because of an apparent, of eating too much fats, apparently.
Yeah.
At least that's what we've been told. And so many South Africans that I've spoken to in preparation for this interview have said they so desperately want to believe what Professor Noakes says because they've felt so good and they've lost weight and they've got energy. But what if this cholesterol story really is as bad as it seems? What if I give up my statins and I really get very sick? And
Yeah.
I'm finding South Africans are at this very interesting place where many South Africans really have seen the results of a low carbohydrate, high fat diet, but are still concerned because their doctors are saying to them, look, your cholesterol is a problem.
Yeah. Okay, that's a great question. So I'll just report the facts that I know, and I don't want to go into too much detail because I'm not qualified. But so firstly, they say that high cholesterol in your blood increases the chances of you having a heart attack. But if you look at the stats of people who have died of heart attacks, 50% of them had above average cholesterol or above dangerous levels of cholesterol, and 50% had below dangerous levels of cholesterol. So surely, if the doctor came along and tested the cholesterol after a heart attack and the guy's cholesterol was high, he'd say, yeah, well, someone should have told him. But the guy whose cholesterol was low, they'll say, wow, what an anomaly. But if 50% of the people who are dying of heart attacks are anomalies, according to the cholesterol theory, then maybe that theory doesn't make any sense. So that's my first comment. The second comment is that it's not just cholesterol. There are different types of cholesterol. And the first is the HDL cholesterol, which is supposed to be high. And then you get your LDL cholesterol, which is supposed to be low. And then you get two different types of LDL. And the one is a small, dense LDL cholesterol particle. And that's the one that you have to monitor. So by just checking your cholesterol, you're not really getting a very clear indication of your risk of a heart attack. So yeah, it's important that people really understand what part cholesterol has to play in cardiac events. The theory that Prof comes up with again in heart disease, and he shares this idea with a lot of other people, is that it's actually inflammation that causes ruptures in your arteries, and not just you see there's another two models, not just a clogging. So the two theories are the inflammation model and the plumbing model. And the plumbing model is if you just pour fat down a drain, eventually it's going to get blocked. But people forget that pouring fat down your throat and what happens to the fat between being in your stomach and being in your bloodstream is a very complex process. And having cholesterol in your blood is not dangerous at all. It's dangerous when you have inflammation. And when you have inflammation in your capillary wall, there can be a rupture, and that's what causes a blocking. So if I could explain it, if that's your artery and it's inflamed, it tightens up, and then what happens is as it's swollen, the wall is swollen, there can be an irritation and a rupture, and then the capillary wall bursts, and that's when you get the blockage. So cholesterol doesn't actually ever cause a rupture, and it doesn't cause the inflammation. So then you need to find out what's causing the inflammation. And it turns out that there are many different indicators of inflammation. And one of them is a high insulin concentration in the blood.
Which takes us right back to what you were saying earlier.
Which takes us back to what I was saying earlier. And then an imbalance of omega-6 and omega-3 fatty acids, which come from a combination of seed oils and sort of animal fats.
Right, so the proteins and the fats that, again, you were talking about earlier.
Yeah, so yeah, you can't just blame cholesterol, in short.